To begin any enclosure project, first we need to install zippers to the Dodger and the Bimini. We're going to start by showing you how to mark the Dodger for the zipper placements.
Okay, now we're going to place the zippers on the Dodger for the front of the door. If you follow your pipe up, and as soon as you start to see this curve into the pipe, then you want to put a mark inside there just before it starts to curve, and that's where you're going to want to start your zipper. With this facing coming down like it is, you don't want to go too high or you're going to be constricted as to your door opening up. So you want to stay into this area where it flows straight out.
Our Dodger has installed a tuck-down tail. A tuck-down tail, as seen here on the aft end of the Bimini, does not allow a lot of flexibility. In comparison, here is a hang-down tail which is installed on the forward edge of our Bimini. You'll notice the hang-down tail allows a lot of access. This is where the extension will eventually be installed on our full enclosure. Since our Dodger does not contain a hang-down tail, it was designed with a tuck-down tail, we have to mark for the zipper below that.
Okay, now on the other side it's the same way here. So if we figure that we're going to use a 24-inch zip, and you see where that curve is starting to go in and you're staying straight the rest of the way. So right there is where you want to have your mark for your zipper to start.
Because our Dodger was made with the tuck-down tail, we have to be careful not to go past the curve because it will tighten up the zipper right at the curve.
And with a 24-inch zipper on this one for our application, you can see that it's coming back with the snap just a few inches above the snap here, which once this is zipped onto here, the door panel is actually going to come down off of that, and that'll be applied and snapped onto the boat also. What we're going to do here is with our split zipper here, our top will come off of this sewn stitch underneath to here and zip underneath there, and that'll connect the two together.
Here's a view of that future step where we're attaching the extension to the Dodger and here underneath the Bimini.
So what we want to do here is, again, we want to stay ahead of, we're going to use this corner of our Bimini for our door accuracy, and then to the top. We don't want to go any lower than that with our extension from the Dodger to the Bimini. So what we want to do is get the straightest line possible, and then we'll come down here, put a mark on our top.
That mark we placed on the Dodger should stop short of the zipper we just discussed that will be used for the side door.
Now you can come above that just a little bit, but I would not go any below it, or you're going to end up with darts and pleats that you don't want to make into this area. And then you want to do the same thing on the other side. And this is where you want to start measuring for your zip. And you want to follow, we're going to sew a facing, homemade facing onto this stitching right here, along with the one side of the zip that will zip onto the cover, so that the flange from the homemade facing will cover the zipper. If the extension's not being used, it won't get into the weather. So we're going to measure this stitch right here that we're going to be running on, clear down to the other side, and again coming off of your Bimini down to your Dodger, go to the mark where we marked for this curve here for our zip coming up the side. Go within that same area and come off of the Bimini top down to that mark that you have here, and then just mark above it on the Dodger. Okay, now we're going to finish our measurements. And we're coming down to 72-inch with ours, which is one of the zipper sizes that we do carry. If it's anywhere longer than that, you can get a longer zipper and we can make that shorter at the end, but we're going to use one long continuous zipper onto the piece here.
Next, we'll mark the Bimini for zipper placement.
Okay, I'm going to show you where to position your zippers at. Now, We want to make sure that you start far enough in front of the bar because you're going to actually have a slider that starts here, and we're going to want to zip toward the front of the Bimini. That way we can use the length, and if we need to cut our zipper off, they'll both be at this end. So both sides will zip from the back forward. And we're just going to make a mark that's just in front of here so that we have room to get in there to start our zip ahead of the bar. Okay, so with our mark under here, you can see there where we'll start the zip. And we'll take it and measure up to this bar.
We'll be installing our window enclosure on the outside of the framing, so we only need one zipper across here. This is the center bow. If you were installing the window on the inside of the frame, you would obviously need two zippers that would stop an inch from this center bow on each side.
So we're going to want to get at least a 54-inch zipper because we want to start again about an inch back from this bar, which would be 2 inches from where the edge of the pocket is actually done. Okay, and also we want to come back to the zips on the sides here, and we want to come down and we want to do a back stitch and try to save maybe a ½ inch below the edge of the facing that's on the top. We'll back stitch that. That way we have this zipper out of the way and plenty of room to install the zippers we're going to put in. But we'll show you that when we get down.
The zippers on our Bimini almost come straight down to the edge of the Bimini. Because of that, we have to rip them up to allow access for this future zipper that we'll be installing on the side of the Bimini. Yours may not have that, so you may not need to do that.
Okay, so we're going to start the zipper here, or run the zipper, I should say, from this point to our zip here.
This is the zipper for the backstay
So we
in
want
our
to
Bimini.
start here. And I like to use the softer zip because you can actually follow the contour of the fabric easier. That way you know you're getting your length.
Deb doesn't mean a soft
Appropriate
zipper,
to
she
what you
means a
need.
soft tape measure.
Okay, so there we have 34 inches. So that tells me I'm going to want a 36-inch zipper. And like I said before, the zipper will start here and we'll zip it toward the out, and then you can shorten it at this point on the outside. So we're going to just come up to this zipper with that other zip, and we want to put it right into the crotch of the seam here where the pocket comes around and zips. So we're going to place it inside there, here, it'll run along here and stop here. Then your next one, you'll want to start right up next to the zipper here, and that'll give you plenty of room in between too to where you can work with the zippers, because with this being a full panel, you'll want that split to be able to get them started a lot easier. So then we go on to that one, and then you want to measure right up into the edge, all the way across. And like I said, we can do the length, shorten the length at this end. A 54-inch zipper should fit fine. So that's what we're going to want there. And again, it'll zip from the center and it'll zip out. We've got the tubing here, and you want to be 2 inches in front of the edge here, or an inch in front of the tube that you can see here. Okay, now our zippers run about 1 3/4 inches, and what we're going to want to be is on the edge of this 1 3/4 inches up, and see, we're going to have to be up here with the edge of our zipper. So like I showed you on the other side, we're going to want to go up here and just come over this line of stitches here and back stitch here, and we want to rip this up, remove these stitches, then our side zippers will lay right in there perfectly. So on this side we'll do the same with measuring from the back end. So then we take our mark here and measure forward. And again, we want to stop short of the pipe. And we've got 51 inches, so we're going to say a 54-inch zip, and then we can shorten it right at this point. And we want to mark that about 1 inch behind the pipe here. Okay, now what we're going to do here is we're going to split the zippers in the center again, just as we did in the back. But I actually measured the front here and just took the whole measurement across, took it in half, and then I'm going to put my zipper up into this edge here again, just as tight to this zipper pocket as possible. Okay, and then we want 2 inches in between there so that you have plenty of room to get your starts and stops. You can go 1.5 inches to 2 inches. I wouldn't go much over 2 inches. So we want to start the zip on that side there, and we want to start the zip on this side here. So there will be a gap in between the 2 zippers. That's where we're going to place them, and then again they'll zip out so that the length can be cut off at the edge.
Here's that future step, zipping on the extension, and you can see we're zipping the zippers out towards the sides of the Bimini. Next, we'll be patterning from the Dodger to create the extension zipper.
We want to pattern the top of this because we're going to place a zipper and a homemade facing across the top here. The facing will work as to cover it from the weather when you're not using your extension, but the zipper will be placed here for the extension piece. Now, along with this, we're marking our stitch line that's under here where the existing pocket was sewn, and we're going to just sew right on that same existing piece. And you want to bring it to where it lays flat on the front and then work it toward the back end here. I'm also going to place a clamp right here on the guardrail, or the grab rail, excuse me. And you can just turn it like down here. And then we'll hold it tight to the other side. And you'll notice how you can move these back and forth and be able to work your pattern fabric to straighten it out. Okay, we're also going to use some of these bigger clamps just to tighten it back. And down. We're just wanting to get the nice stitch line here. Clamp it. Clamp it. Once you have your patterning fabric laid where you want, and you just take this, and we made our previous mark right straight in from the rod. So we'll go over that with the marker, and then we'll just follow through the curve. And we can connect this once we take the pattern down. Now, as you see, I'm kind of just brushing it out and holding it as I'm marking it, just to be sure that it's nice and tight to the back edge, because we're going to be going backwards, so this is more important than what's out here. And now that we have this patterning done for it, we can remove the pattern and remove the Dodger and the Bimini and apply all the zippers. We put the starboard out, kind of call it just south. That way we know this is the starboard side. The opposite side we call pout, just as the south, only it's the port side out. And if you want, you can also put the front, whichever markings you want to use that you're used to using will work just fine.
Next, we'll remove the Bimini and also the Dodger and take it to our loft table for sewing of zippers. Now that we've marked the Bimini and the Dodger for the placements of the zippers, it's now time to sew them on.
Now we're at the machine, getting ready to place the zippers on the underside of the Bimini top. So we'll go in where we've made our marks.
We've turned the Bimini so the underside is facing
This is the front,
up.
which we had two 48-inch zips. So We want to make sure that all your zipper slides are toward the inside and up when you're sewing these down. So we have a 48 that we're going to place in here inside the seam, and then we'll cut it off here at the tail. And the same way with this side with our other 48, making sure that our slide's up. Then we'll have a 36, 54, and each one will have a 54 on the sides. And I'm going to put seam stick. I like to use the 1/4 inch seam stick on the back of the zipper. Just kind of help hold it in place before it's being stitched
By
down.
using a 1/4 inch seam stick, that keeps the glue away from the teeth, so position the seam stick as far away from the teeth as possible.
What you want to do is you want to put your zipper up inside as close to the original pocket seam for the tubing as possible, and then just run it right down just as close inside as you can, all the way down. And with that holding in place on your zip, then you'll know right where you want to end that. Okay, now we're going to have this zipper coming up here also, which we marked earlier for our stop. So we just take this zip and we're going to mark it here. Go ahead and zip the zipper then shut, and you can just continue your line over there, and that way we know exactly where to hot knife it. And then you want to unzip it, and then we'll pull that back up and we'll hot knife those off, and we'll meld a tooth that will stop it, the slide from coming off. And we'll do the same on this side.
Here you can see that gap in the center that is 2 inches. That's the center forward edge of our Bimini, as we discussed earlier when we placed marks on the Bimini.
Okay, again, we make the mark for this zip, and we're going to unzip both of those and cut them off.
We'll be using the Sailrite Edge Hot Knife Package. This is a great hot knife, and you can see we're not using the cutting foot, so we're using a metal ruler on the backside to prevent damage to the tabletop or the fabric underneath. If you do not have a professional hot knife like this, you could use a wood-burning tool or a soldering gun. We'll use 2 of the teeth we just cut off and press them into the end of the zipper that is on our Bimini. Then we'll use the hot knife to melt both edges, being careful not to catch fire to the teeth. This makes a great stop. If you don't use the stainless steel stops, this is always an alternative to creating your own stop.
And then we can actually cut this edge right off.
We did that exact same procedure to the zipper on the other side to create our homemade stop.
Once that's cooled off, just stick it right back down, and your zip slide can't go past there. So now we'll sew both zippers down. Okay, we've switched to the roping foot so that we can miss the walking on our teeth, and also I'm going to move my needle to the left position so that it sews closer to the edge. Okay, now you want to make sure that you back stitch here at the beginning so that your thread holds real well and your zipper end will hold. You can run the foot right along the tooth of the zipper. You want to lift your foot, zip past it, and put the foot back down.
Because the zipper is pushed into a sleeve and there's a lot of bulk at that point, we put in a roping zipper foot left, which makes the sewing a little bit easier. It may not be required, but it definitely makes it a little bit more easier to sew the zipper on.
And again, back stitch. Come across. Back stitch again. And again, the back
All right,
stitch.
both zippers are now installed to the forward edge of the Bimini. Now let's move on.
Okay, now this is our 54-inch that we're going to put onto the side, which we marked in front of the rear and behind the front. And also I had mentioned how we're going to pull this zip up so that our side zipper will be allowed to go up underneath. So what we're going to do first here is just clip these threads just up to the line that's sewn where our side tail's been sewn on, because we want a little bit of thickness where we do our back stitching here.
If the sleeve zipper on your Bimini doesn't extend all the way down to the edge like ours does, you may not need to clip the threads. It may be
So we'll
further
pull these
enough away
stitches
that you
out.
can sew on the new zipper without that zipper getting in the way. And now that those stitches are ripped out a little bit, about an inch back so we can have access for the new zipper, we're going to reinforce the stitching by reversing a little bit here at the end.
Okay, so we're going to start back a little bit and go ahead and do a few back stitches right on the zipper. And we're going to come up to this stitch, and then we'll back stitch a few right in that spot. Just make sure that the zipper's anchored well.
Typically, Deb does a little bit too much back stitching, in my opinion.
We'll do this
That's
with
just
all
my
4 of
opinion.
them, too.
She likes to make sure things are tacked down well.
Okay, so now we have these both taken back so that we can run our zip under them. Open the pocket up. And this being the back of the Dodger, we want it to zip forward so that we can cut off the length where we
Whoops,
need to.
Deb meant back of Bimini, not
Making
Dodger.
sure that your zipper slide is up. We're going to seam stick on the underside.
The double-sided tape is definitely your friend. This helps to hold the zippers to the canvas prior to sewing, so you can take it over to the sewing machine and sew it without things moving on you. Peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and then baste your zipper in place at the marks that we did previously.
Okay, so we're going to start our zip now, to where we can zip it underneath this. And I'm going to run my zipper underneath here so that the edge of my zip is just over the edge stitching.
Doing it this way will ensure that the zipper is hidden from the elements in the sun.
It just kind of gives you a guideline to flow with as you're sticking it down. And it also will keep the zipper up underneath the tail a little bit so it's less seen on the outside. Okay, now we have our mark here that we made where we want our zipper to stop. So we'll be cutting the zipper off there.
This is about an inch away from the tubing when it's installed onto the
We'll
frame.
do that the same manner that we did on the front zips.
We didn't show it, but we cut the zipper short, took out a couple of teeth, 2 or 3, and then we're using the hot knife to melt those teeth into both sides of this zipper.
Okay, so I'm going to bring this up, stick it down. Okay, and we're ready to sew that down.
We still have the roping zipper foot left installed on the Sayrite Ultrafeed sewing machine. That's probably not necessary for this application, but because we do, we're going to move the needle all the way to the left so we get that stitch closer to the outside flange of the zipper. And as you can see, when we get to the slider, we bury the needle, lift the foot, move the slider up, lower the foot, and continue sewing. At the end of the zipper, we'll do some reversing. We're now ready to install the zippers to the aft end of the Bimini. Our Bimini has one backstay slit. If yours has more than one, say 2 slits, you may need to install, or you will have to install, 3 zippers for your
Okay,
enclosure.
so we're gonna
For
have
ours,
a
we
short
only need
zipper.
2.
Goes from the center out. Since we have our zip for our backstay here, we're going to bring these zippers right up to the edge of this zipper on either side. So we'll need to match up where they are with the zippers face up, with the zipper slides face up, and then you'll flip them, seam stick them to hold them in place, and we'll mark to where we want them cut off. What we're showing you now is after I got all the zippers sewed on, the placements of them, our marks, our pockets are back. Tabs.
All right, we've sewn all the zippers onto the Bimini. And here at the aft end, you can see where we installed those zippers, which we did not show in the video. But you can see where they're spaced there at the backstay.
You want to leave your zippers in full tact. We're going to be using those as a guideline on the sides.
Deb zipped on the other half of the zipper so we can use those in a later step in patterning. Now we'll show you how to make the Dodger extension zipper from the pattern we created from the Dodger.
Okay, now we're over here in our patterning fabric with the line that we struck on top of the Dodger, and our zipper is going to run right inside of this edge, and we're going to bring a flap forward to cover it for when the extension's not on it. We just need to connect our dots here.
This is the patterning we did on top of the Dodger for the zipper that will attach the extension, and we'll also be making a flange or facing from this pattern as well.
And this was the line that we made from the existing pocket seam on the Dodger top. Now, one more thing that we'll want to do here is our pattern will be here. This is the front headed toward the Dodger, so our flap or tail that we're going to be covering the zipper with when the extension's not in use. The zipper will be sewn on that seam, and then also the tuck tail or flap, whichever you wish to call it, will be over top of here. So we're going to go ahead and make a 2-inch flap. And what we're going to do once this flap has been cut out is it'll have a fold over of about an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch hem going across, and that'll bring this back, and the binding will go around the outer edge from one edge to the other to finish this edge off.
Here's a sneak peek of what it'll look like on top of the Dodger. That's that flange or tail that hides the zipper underneath as seen.
So what we want to do here is measure out 2 inches from this line, and again make some more lines to connect, and we'll do that all the way down the edge here.
This line is not much of a curve, but if it were, you want to make sure the ruler is perpendicular to the line when you're marking your 2-inch distance. So notice here that as Deb is coming to the curve, the ruler is perpendicular to the line.
Straight up the ruler with that and across. Okay, so we have our corner here. So what you want to do is just kind of bring it to where this edge and the corner here is meeting.
Deb's using a roll of seam stick here as a guide. However, you can do this by hand if you'd like as well.
Two sides in the corner, and just bring it right around like that. And we'll cut this right straight here. You got your curve there, and we'll connect all these lines, and then we can cut this off.
The Durascrim pattern material cuts beautifully with just scissors. You'll notice that as Deb cuts the top edge, she is about an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch away from that line.
I'm cutting a little bit wider here at this edge just so I have a better tuck under. You could add a 1/4 inch here if you want, but it isn't really that hard to cut just a little bit wider.
I would definitely recommend adding a 1/4 inch, as Deb has done. We've placed the pattern material on top of the fabric, and now we draw around it.
Okay, now we just draw around the pattern.
All throughout this video, we're using the soapstone pencil. Great thing about the soapstone pencil is if you don't like what you put down, or if you want to remove it later, it's easy to remove with just water.
And again, you can make these corners square if you want. It's just when you're binding it, it's easier just to come right around the curve and continue right on. Okay, now that we have it drawn in, I'm going to go down to the hot knife. It's going to cover up the zipper. I'm just going to hot knife it right
Using a
down
hot
the
knife
edge.
helps to seal the edge of the synthetic fabric to keep it from unraveling. We highly recommend using a hot knife. If you don't have a professional hot knife like the Serrat Edge hot knife, you could use a wood burning tool or a soldering
Okay, I'm going to
gun.
run a row of seam stick here. And what I'm going to do is just fold it right over onto itself, and that'll be right around 1/4 inch. I'm going to let just a little bit of the fabric show on this outer edge.
This is a 3/8 inch basting tape. It's great for
Run it
hems
all
and
the way around the edge
seams.
here.
The 1/4 inch seam stick that we used previously
And
is
the way
great for
that I'll do
zippers.
this is when I pull this seam stick up. And we'll just take this edge and just fold your edge right to the edge of that seam stick right there. And just go along the whole edge that way.
If this umbrella doesn't baste well to the seam stick, you could use a hard object to help crease it. This hem is rather small, so doing this helps significantally. My apologies for all the noise in the background. It's business as
Okay.
usual here at
So
Sailrite.
since we just did a fold on this like so, make sure that that's folded down because we're not going to stitch this till we sew the zipper and the whole thing on. And we'll take a few stitches onto our binding.
We're using the 1-inch swing-away binder, and we're installing a 1-inch bias
Okay.
binding.
And do a couple back stitches here.
Now you can put a 3/4 inch bias binding on as well using a 3/4 inch binder. If you do not have a binder attachment, you can pre-fold the binding on the edge of a sharp table and then just feed it on by hand as you're sewing it with the sewing machine. Doesn't come out as nice, but it still works. When you get to the curve, if you've made a curve in your
You
flange,
have to turn
go
it just
slowly.
a little bit so that you make sure you get your stitch on it.
Bury your needle, lift your foot if you need to, and push the material up against the edge of the binder. Doing this, you'll be ensured that you catch
Okay.
the edge of the fabric
Needle
and feed
down,
it into
lift
the
up your
binding.
foot, and make sure that this is folded. And slide it back underneath your binding. Put down. Back stitch. So now we're just going to hot knife the ends of the binding so that it's a lot more finished look.
I apologize for the background noise.
Same
We're
thing on
plotting
this
sales
corner.
and the vacuum table is on.
So now we're getting ready to install the zipper. And once the zipper, we're going to go ahead and install the zipper on here because it's a lot easier to transition this on and then this onto the top because this actual pocket from the Dodger has the zipper underneath. That's the same stitch line that we're going to be sewing on. Now it can vary in and out just ever so slightly, but the easiest way would be to just kind of come up to the zipper and mark. You can feel where the edge of the zipper is. The teeth of the zipper's out here, which is going to be the same way that the teeth of the zipper on this will be. So the zipper teeth will actually be stacked up on top of each other. So we need a guideline as to where to put the edge of the zipper because we don't want the zipper falling forward and then end up sewing into the teeth that are below it. So we'll just go along here, make an edge.
So Deb's feeling where the flange is from the zipper on the bottom side, placing her
Like I
fingernail
said, you
against
can
it, and then
kinda
placing a
feel where
mark.
the edge of the zipper is. Okay, we're going to seam stick the edge of this just to maybe tack it on, hold it in place as we're going. Okay, now I'm going to start the end of the zipper at the line. We're going to work up, and remember we're going to cover up those dashes that we made that are at the edge of the zip. And I want to mention too that when I'm installing this zipper, I'm installing it upside down. And the reason for that is when you put your extension on, it's a lot easier to lay your extension on the top of the Dodger and start your zipper here and zip it on than it is to try to have the Dodger hanging down in front of you and jiggling it around trying to get it zipped from the front side and then flip down. So I found that this works quite well for zipping it on and leaving it laid to the Dodger. So on we go. Now when you get down here to the end, you can hot knife the end of that off, or like ours, we've got the zipper that's the right length. You can just take it, fold it back, tuck it under itself, put it down. Okay, so we took our binder off and we have our left foot on here again for our zipper.
The use of the roping zipper foot left is probably not required here. You could use the standard foot and just move the needle so that it's the appropriate distance away from the teeth. As you're sewing the zipper on, be sure that the basting tape does not come loose, so check your work to make sure that the zipper is laying in the correct position before you continue to sew down the entire length.
Okay, now we'll lift the foot up, slide our slider ahead. You always want to make sure your needle's into the fabric when you do that. Okay, and then we're going to just keep right on going around the zip here.
Here we are coming to the end, and we do some reversing to lock the stitch in place.
Okay, now we have the zipper sewn on, and if you flip it over, you can see that we are real close to the same stitch that we took on the zipper for the inside pocket. Now, we have our crease here, and we're just going to go a little bit at a time on here to make sure that the fold stays over, and we're going to stay as close to the edge as possible. And we're going to put it up against the edge of the zipper, just a hair past it. That way we're sewing through the zippers too, and we're not going through just one thickness of canvas.
You could put the 1/4 inch basting tape onto the flange if you like, but it's really not required, as Deb will do here.
We'll put our flap right to the end of the zipper and then just bring it slightly past. Okay, and then just come down here with your crease, come ahead.
Because we have the roping zipper foot left on and we don't have the standard foot, it did catch here because this is rather thick.
And if that happens,
but Deb's going to work past it. The Ultrafeed LSC sewing machine will always sew better with a standard foot rather than a roping zipper foot left. So, when you don't need the roping zipper foot left or right, remove it and put the standard foot on.
Got 2 zippers underneath, so there's quite a thickness there, but we still managed it. Come up to this point, and then
Deb's going to remove the other half of the zipper altogether so she doesn't have to worry about that slider.
You can actually take the zipper off at this point and just keep coming forward slightly with the Okay, now we have our zipper cover on, flap. You want to remember to put your other part of your zipper back on here now that we've got it on and it's out of the way.
Now we need to sew the zippers on to the side of the Dodger, and we're going to apply the 1/4 inch basting tape to the extreme outer edge of the zipper flanges.
Okay, so we found that it works a lot better if you have your slider to your canvas and your panels have the piece with the 2 starting tooth. That way this is already on the canvas and you can take your door or your panel and just push right up into it and then use your slider to hold it in there and pull down. So what we want to do is get both of these. You've got one on each side of the Dodger, and this is where we mark that the grab rail's at, and the front of the door will be attached to, and we'll start marked where we were going to start our zipper just below the cutout and run it straight down to the snap that snaps just in front of the door. And we'll put double sliders on this, that way you can enter from the outside or come out from the inside and have a slider to work with, whether it's at the rear of your door or the front of your door. And we're going to also incorporate one at the top of the door. So you want to unzip these. We want to make sure that we put seam stick opposite, one side from the other. So if we line these up with the teeth facing each other, we know we want seam stick going down this edge. Okay, and then we'll have one for the right side and one for the left side. Okay, so we're ready to apply them. And again, we have our pocket from the inside here, and we're going to go right in, put it right up as close to that pocket as we possibly can. And we want the zipper to always zip down, that way you can hold your panel up into the slider and then zip it down. So we'll seam stick it inside. Yeah, we flip the Dodger over so that we have the inside facing up. And we're going to start those as we marked them here. And you want this to come just as tight to the pocket edge as possible. And then when you come down here, just run it right inside of this stitch. We'll go right down to the snap. And it doesn't really need to zip all the way down there because this is right up against the boat at this point where it's attached. And again, you want to back stitch at the beginning so that you can hold your zip. And again, double stitch at the bottom. Okay, now you want to put the other side of the zipper back on now that you've got it sewn down. You can leave it on or not. It really doesn't make that much difference. I just like to get it out of the way. And then come over to the side. We got our pocket. We're going to put our zip right in here, just like we did on the other side. And then we'll be putting the covers back on the boat.
This video chapter will show you how to make an extension panel. The extension panel will join the tops of the Bimini and the Dodger together.
Okay, now we're going to go ahead and mark where the zipper's lying here. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to try to just draw the line right in the center of where the teeth are running rather than the edge here. That way we have the very front edge that we want to take on our extension front, because we're going to be putting binding right at that edge and the zipper falling right at the edge. So we want to kind of get a precise line as to the way the zipper falls. The better the line, the better the fit. So I'm going to go ahead and use the clamps here and clamp the patterning fabric down. Okay, so we're going to start like right in the center here and just kind of work your patterning fabric down and clamp it as you go. Okay, so first thing we're going to do here, mark the starboard side and the port side, which this would be the port side out, so we'll call that the pout. Just kind of get it tight here, hold it down. You can see where the teeth are running here. You can just start like in the center of it, and just every so often, about every 2-3 inches or so, you want to mark on the center of the teeth here, and then we'll come back and connect the lines over at the table. And then when you get down here to the end of the zipper, you want to make sure and mark where the end of that zipper is too, right underneath the flange. So the zipper's landing right here. That way we know exactly where to start the zipper going the other way. We'll have a start and a stop spot, which will be at the other end. And then we can also say that we want this to the front. That way you don't get mixed up which way you're going. And also your zipper start is at. Because once you get over to the table, it's hard to remember which end was the start end. And we're going to write on the pattern that this is where the zipper start is at. We can take this pattern off now. Okay, and you'll notice that the slide is underneath. Now, it's a lot easier to be able to zip your extension on from right here behind your Dodger than it is to have to lean over the whole front end of your Dodger and then try to zip it on from the outside. So you want to make sure that when you put the zipper on your cover that your slide is actually facing upside down.
I believe Deb is right, but this is a preference. You could have it up if you choose.
We want to go ahead and measure how far it is in here to our zip, because the center of this zipper is going to determine where the back side comes so that it's held nice and taut. Okay? So one of the best ways is to go right from the center, which is probably the narrowest part of your extension, come back to your zipper here, and you can see that we're at about 13.5 from the center of the zip over. I'm going to go right straight back from my center seam, and I'm going to mark a center mark on my zipper and cover. That way I can mark this also on this zipper so that we don't get twisted all in our extension. We'll be able to mark these out the same distance as where this one is that's staying on the Bimini, or on the Dodger, I'm sorry. Okay, now this is a 72-inch zipper that's on our Dodger. So the way that I have kind of come through with it is I took half of that, which is 36 inches. So we want to make a center section that is straight from the Dodger back to the Bimini, because that helps hold it tight, and then we can flange out at an angle tight for the outside here, coming down to our door top, which is going to be across here like so.
Here's a preview of what that extension will look like. You can see it's built into 3 panels. So there are 3 panels in our extension.
So I'd take the center here, and half would be 18 of the 36. So we'll mark that zipper there, and you'll end up with 18 inches here and at the other end.
Measure the length of your zipper, divide it by 4, and then place those marks on the length of the zipper. Basically, the zipper is divided into 4 separate sections.
The front of our Bimini has got 84 inches across it, all the way from the end of one curve to the other end, from door to door. Okay, so we know the back side of our canvas has got to be 84 inches at least, so we'll make it just a slight bit longer than that, say 86, 88 inches. That way we'll have plenty to come down, and then we'll pattern the doors off of that once we attach to the Dodger and the Bimini. Okay, so we know we got to have the back centered straight from this center we'll have to divide that into 42 inches, we'll say 44 inches on either side of where our center was here. And we'll want at least 42 inches going out. And then across here, we're coming from the bottom of our zipper in the center over to where our side panel ends up. So we see that that is 26 inches. So we actually want a couple more inches than that because it's always better to have more than not enough. And once they get zipped on, we can always cut those back off, but we want to be able to attach it to the door correctly with the fabric that we have involved. So we'll go ahead and make sure that the bottom of this is at least 28 inches wide. And we know the center of it's got to be at least 13 to our center section is going to be coming out this 36 inches. And then we'll kind of angle back because we're going to divide the Bimini top into two also for the 42 inches. And then we'll be able to get our first 42 inches here. And then we'll go 22, 23 inches out from that point with our extension ends to the doors.
This illustration should make it more clear. You can see the side for the Bimini on the right. We'll take the total length of those zippers, there are 2 of them on the Bimini, from end to end, and we'll divide it by 2. That's where we will have a seam that will join, let's call it the wing, on each side of the extension to build shape into the extension.
Okay, now we'll take our zipper off since we have our marks on here now. And we'll get the front of our extension finished off and ready to come back to the boat to do our extension for our zippers on the Bimini. Okay, so now we're just going to go ahead and connect the dots. Now this is where I marked where the end of the zipper is. And that's on the starboard side out, port side out is down there, and that's where the start of the zipper is. Okay, so this is where the zipper ends. So we're going to bring that center line right down to that and just kind of connect our lines here. Okay, now all we need to do is cut it out, and I'm going to cut out this top edge, that way you have all your notes here. Get down to the other end, we may want to remark the start. Okay, since we cut off where I wrote start, we're going to go ahead and write it on here again, which is the zipper start. I'm going to go ahead and turn it around so that I'm working on the front edge, which would be the Dodger edge. Now bring this down. I'll hold my pattern fabric on with my ruler here.
We apologize for all the noise in the background. It's business as usual here at Sailrite. Jeff is plotting sails, and the vacuum table is sucking the fabric down to hold it securely while the plotter marks and cuts the sail panels.
Now we have our marks on the zipper. This is the starter of the zipper. Okay, so we have our center that we marked on the boat. Then we have our 18 inches out. Okay, so we want to mark that on our pattern as it flows from the start out. Okay, so this is our 18-inch mark here.
For our boat, it's 18 inches. Your boat will probably have a different measurement.
Okay. Then you just lay your zipper down. This is the center here. Okay. Go back across here. And then we have our 18-inch mark here. So we'll mark that out. And this is our other 18-inch mark. Okay, so we have our 36 center here, and this is where I was telling you that we're going to go right straight back into here, taking 42 inches across from the center back.
Let's take a look at that illustration one more time. She's marked those 3 locations on the Dodger side, and now she's talking about the 42 inches on the Bimini side. Yours will be different, obviously.
What I'll do here is go from my center straight back with my square. I'll get the center here. Okay. And then also we had 13.5 inches right into the center, okay? So we'll go back to 13.5 inches, which is right about there, okay? So we want to make sure that our center is right there. And we can also check that with our Bimini. Once we get the zipper on the front section, we'll check our center with the Bimini, and then there are 2 zippers on the Bimini start in the center and zip out, and there's a 2-inch section here. So we'll be marking that once we get the front finished off, zipped on, and go to pattern this off the Bimini zippers. 84 inches across here. So our center panel, we're going to go ahead and cut for half of the 84 inches to the 42. So half of the 42, 21. So we're going to set our center right here at 21, okay? And we'll mark out this way and this way. Okay, we'll mark our 18s. And again, I just used an equation on the Bimini, the same as I did on the Dodger. We had 72 inches on the Dodger. I split that in half, it's 36. 36 being the center straight panel. The other 36 you divide in half on each for the outer panels that go to the doors, which will be wider than your center section. And this will keep it nice and taut through the center while you pattern the other ends. So now we mark these 2 here, along with our centers marked. Okay, so we'll go out to our 42 inch from our 18.
The length of the line is undetermined, so Deb's going to make it extra long here.
And we'll strike a line there.
We want extra material on the Bimini side. That's why she goes long.
And the same on the front, or the same on the port side. That's the starboard side. We'll come straight out to the 42 here. And we want to give ourselves a little bit of room, so we've got plenty of fabric for patterning. More is always better. Okay. And then we're just going to come right straight across here. So we have plenty back in here because we want to be able to zip this on and pull it tight and pattern off the zipper at the Bimini onto this edge.
After the zipper's been sewn onto the extension front edge, the edge that attaches to the Dodger, this is what we'll be doing to the trailing edge or the aft edge that attaches to the Bimini. We'll be using that extra fabric there to create a pattern for the back side.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and make our line off the pattern here. And this is going to be our cut edge, and we're going to run binding on it, and then we'll run our zipper just under the binding.
We're going to label it here in the corner, Pout, for port side out.
Okay, so
we'll be adding a half inch to the sides of this panel. That'll be for the semi-flat filled seam that we're going to be doing.
Our seams.
We'll add that half inch to the other side as well.
So we're going to be doing a flat filled seam here. The D for the Dodger, and back here B for Bimini.
We'll now cut out that middle section of our extension with the Sailrite Edge hot knife. Once the center section of our extension is cut out, we're going to use it to pattern our wings.
So we're going to mark the center here. And our other edge is up here. So in order to get our center, we have to come up here, mark a center, center, and then we're going to mark the edge off of here. We're going to mark the outer edge. Here. Okay, so then we'll come back under here to add our 1/2 inch.
We don't want to confuse you here. We're actually adding this 1/2 inch to the right of that line we just struck down that matched up to our pattern piece that we were using. We'll explain that a little bit more in detail here coming up.
Okay, continue over with this piece. And then see, once this is sewn to here, it'll move this edge a 1/2 inch over because you'll be sewing here. This is your 1/2 inch here, your 1/2 inch going under. So your stitches will be along this edge on the inside of that wing and on the inside of the center panel. Okay, so then come back over here. And you'll notice that there is a 1/2 inch off, which allows you this 1/2 inch for when you sew it together here.
Why'd we do that? Well, Deb's going to explain it now. We'll actually be
this
using our
off.
pattern material to create the wing. We used that fabric blank earlier just so that we had something to follow on the fabric so we could lay up our pattern material on top of it.
You have your 1/2 inch mark here now, a 1/2 inch this way because you've added your 1/2 inch that way for the end section. Just pretend there's, you know, you're not doing this, the center section at all. You just wanted to center this piece so that your edge is going to be at the 18-inch mark, because this will actually be sewn underneath of this piece, making this the finished. Okay, so your center will match up with a 1/2 inch from the original. As you can see, these line up here. Added our 1/2 inch, so we just have to shift our 1/2 inch over.
Now we'll use the Durastring to pattern the wing.
Lay our patterning fabric down. Okay, our zipper end's right here, so we don't have to come any further this way. So we mark here. We know that's the end for our zip. And then we follow our pattern. Back up around again.
So the pattern material is matching up to that line that we just drew. We're using that line as a reference to be sure that it's exactly the shape that we wanted and the length.
Okay. Now on this end out by the door, we were at 24 inches. So we want to make that 27. That way we have plenty. Before we do that, now up here, our center section was 42, and we're going to split that other 42 into 21 so that we go from our center straight taut piece out to our outer, we'll call it a wing over the door. So we want to go from what'll be our finished edge out here, okay, and that's going to end up being at least 21 inches, we know. So we're going to bring it out here to like 23. We'll give ourselves a couple extra inches, okay? And we may have to adjust that, but what you want to do at this point now is we want at least 24 here, and we agreed to make it closer to 27. And it looks like we're pretty close there, so we'll just go ahead and use the whole thing and then just connect those two angles, because we're already got our 18 here and our one there, 23 with a couple extra inches. And there you have our wing section. So we'll continue this out here. We want to cut this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge. And that's going to be our section. This is our 1/2 inch allowance. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and do the same thing the other side. And this is the pout side here. So we'll write pout on this. Because we know on the pout side, that's where our zipper is going to start. So we can put start here. And our zip's going to start at the pout end. Okay. And we're going to come back and make our center. Line up again to make our other edge. And we're not going to be using any of this, so we can disregard what we have here and make us a new center. Because we're already finished with this end, we only need to go center out, just so that we can line it up.
We're not going to show that whole process again. It's the
End
exact
panel,
same thing.
and
Here it
starboard
is
side,
complete.
which is the south. Okay, and this is for our 1/2 inch seam. Cut there, here.
We'll cut those wing sections, as we have referred to them, out with the Sailrite Edge hot knife. If you don't have that, you could use a wood burning tool or a soldering gun. But if you're doing a project like this, you definitely need to buy a professional hot knife. That's my opinion. Okay, all those panels are ready now to be sewn together. The Dodger edge is flush, but the Bimini edge, where it will be zipped onto the Bimini, is a little bit longer. That's quite all right because we haven't patterned that yet. Now we'll use double-sided tape and baste them together.
So once you get this basted, then you take your 1/2 inch seam, and then we're going to do the semi-flat felled seam.
The outside surfaces are facing each other. As the illustration demonstrates, we're going to sew a 1/2 inch from the raw edges of those two panels that are laid on top of each other with the outside surfaces facing each other. So this is a 1/2 inch over from the raw edge. Deb's laid another row of basting tape down that 1/2 inch side. We typically don't do that, but it's not a bad idea. A semi-flat felled seam typically is just laid on top of itself, and then that edge is just kept to one side. But this isn't a bad idea. Let's show you that illustration one more time to give you a better example of it.
Okay. Do that.
Now we'll take it over to the sewing machine, being sure that we catch that little 1/2 inch tail on the bottom side, to the side that we're going to be sewing, and we'll sew this top stitch. That's typically what it's called, a top stitch. The idea of a semi-flat felled seam is that it's stronger. You've got 2 stitches, and 1 stitch is hidden from the elements. However, in our situation, we're using a Helios thread, so the thread will never rot, so it's really not as important, but it still is a great stitch, and it gives a finished look on the outside surface. The underside, as shown here, has 2 stitches, and it's not a finished look, but it's still sufficient. And do the same thing to the opposite end. We'll not show it all. We're now going to take that panel and we're going to reinforce the forward edge. We'll be actually reinforcing all the edges of this panel, but we're going to show you reinforcing the forward edge first. We're going to use scrap fabric for that.
Okay, so now we're going to make our facing that'll be sewn on 2.5 inches in from the edge. Now, to be able to use up pieces that you have, because it's going to be an underside facing just for make it a little more sturdy on the zipper edges, we're going to piece it together. The easiest way to piece it together is when you come along here. This is of course going to be where your facing will start, and you want to follow this line, the same as the edge for the Dodger. And we're only making a facing for the Dodger edge right now because we haven't taken this back to the boat. We need to have the facing put on before the binding and before the zipper.
We're trying to keep from wasting fabric, so we're going to cut this facing into sections. If you have more fabric and you don't care about wasting
So
it,
we'll
you
come
can do
up
it all in one
through
piece.
as far as we can on the fabric piece we have here. Okay, once you get to the point that you're running out of fabric to be able to get your width out of, make a mark on here. Okay, so when you come back to your other facing, coming back on here, which we'll show you, you want to be sure and come past this point, and we can just overlay those pieces. They don't have to be sewn with a seam or anything. It'll just bulk it up, and then if you just overlay it, it'll lay nice and flat for you and work out quite well with the binding and all. So what we're going to do here is, we've got our mark here now. We can go ahead and take this up. And we want to have a 2.5 inch facing coming in. And you can make that as wide as you want or narrower that you want.
It can be 2 inches. I wouldn't go anything less than 2 inches. We're going 2.5. I wouldn't probably go more than 3 inches. When placing these marks, be sure that the ruler is perpendicular to the line we drew on the fabric.
And then we're going to hot knife that off, and we're just going to use it as a hot knife edge and stitch it down to the top.
You'll see here at the curve, we're keeping that ruler perpendicular to the line.
Okay. I'm going to just do it all the way down to this end. So now we know where that edge there is. If you want, you can come back and connect all those. Or as you're hot knifing it off, cutting it, you can just dot to dot to dot to dot while you're cutting. Okay, so now we're going to come back up here to where we know we've got at least 2.5 inches of area above our other facing. Okay. And we'll have plenty here to get our facing onto the piece below. So come down here, make our line. Make sure that this is laying down flat. This is the line we made earlier. So we want to make sure we go on beyond that line. And you can go 1/2 inch, 2 inches, whatever. It really isn't going to make any difference in the cover. Bring your line up.
And we'll continue to do the same thing we did with the opposite facing panel that we made. That's all there is to it.
Or you just come in here, hit that dot, aim for the next one, and just keep right on going. This is the inner edge where you don't have to line it up. It's just taking on a little bit more strength for the zipper. This way. We've got our edge where we need to line that up to there. Okay. And you can sew that if you want. Really, there isn't any need to because we're going to be sewing to this edge and that edge. So what I do is just go ahead and take seam stick and put along the edge here, hold it in place. And then also on this edge. And that'll just hold it together real good for you. Get ready to sew it down. Okay, and then you just line up that edge there. Bring this edge across. Just lay it flat, like so. You can base this edge here.
Now we'll base this facing to the bottom side. This is the inside surface of that extension panel that we sewed together. So right along the edge, so the edges are even. And here we are at the opposite end, and it came out even. Miracles do happen.
That's always a good thing. I'm going to take this and flip it over. I'm going to sew this inner edge first. to hold that down, and then our binding and zipper will go to this edge.
Once the stitch is complete, to hold the facing in place, we're ready to apply the binding and then also the zipper. We'll show that next. To sew the binding along the forward edge of our extension, we're going to use the 1-inch swing-away binder sold from Sailrite. We've installed a 1-inch bias binding inside the binder and are now ready to sew it onto the edge. Deb's going to explain next that she's going to stay away from the ends so she can finish the ends later when she's sewing down the binding and the zippers. That would not be my choice. I'd rather sew down the binding and the zippers and rip stitches if I need to finish the ends.
Point was right at this edge here, like so. So we're going to run our binding here, but we're going to want to leave that just a little bit loose there because we're also going to be running binding across the edge. So we're not going to start the binding or the zipper right at the very end. We want to start a couple inches up. That way we've got plenty of room to work to mark off our zippers for the top of the door.
That's Deb's opinion, not mine, but both ways work.
Up in there.
So you can see here that we left a few inches hanging over the edge, and we're not going to sew it probably about an inch down from the corner of the umbrella fabric. The binder does all the folding of the binding. All you have to do is keep that fabric up against the edge of the binder, and it does all the work. Keeps your stitch nice and straight, and also applies the binding on perfectly. Here at the end, we're going to leave a few inches hanging off the edge as well.
Okay, and the same on this end. You don't want to go to the very end, so you got room.
That's Deb's opinion, not mine. Both ways work.
And just pull that
It is
out.
always a good idea to leave the binding long at the edges.
Just cut it off so it's a little long. Stop a little bit short so you get room for the other coming on.
Deb's going to talk about securing the zipper next.
Okay, we have such a long length here that you may want to staple it, pin it, clamp it. I found some T-pins here that I'm pinning mine every so often, especially on the curve, because it has a tendency to want to gather up on your zipper when you have such a stiff surface with your canvas built up. It'll want to feed your zipper in quicker than what it does the canvas. So if you sew and pull your pins as you go, you come down to your points that we have marked and get those anchored good, and then just throw in a few pins in between. You should be okay. Now just for the short lengths, like we're going to be doing like on the ends at the doors, you won't have that problem so much, but here we have a 72-inch length, and on the back we're going to have 84, so we'll want to make sure that we hold it with something.
And here we'll put in a couple T-pins just to show you how that process is done. We're not going to show you all this, but we are going to show you a couple of them.
You can use however many they want, but and then I'm going to come down here at my mark and pin that there so that for sure is where I need it to be.
The issue with sewing long lengths of zippers is that they never seem to come out right when you're done. Typically the zippers will shrink or sometimes stretch. So it's a good idea to pin long lengths of zipper in place, or at least make tack marks so you can determine that you're not pulling one piece of fabric or the sewing machine's feeding on one piece of fabric faster than the other. Pinning it like this will be assured that it's right.
And then as you can see, the center foot's riding right on the edge of the binding, and our teeth are just peeking out of the binding here.
Because we're sewing right next to that binding, we need to put in the roping zipper foot left for the Ultrafeed LSC sewing machine.
Pull out this pin.
In lieu of using pins, you could use double-sided tape, but you have to be careful that the zipper stays in place. And Deb is being careful to make sure the zipper is staying right along that edge as she sews it.
I'll put our needle down, pull out this pin. And let your teeth just showing out the edge of the binding.
And here we are coming to the opposite end. We'll stop short.
Right on there. Yeah, because we want to stop a couple inches back, or inch or so back, so that we have room putting our zipper across.
And here's what it looks like on the bottom side when we're done. Now we're ready to take this extension panel to the boat and start the patterning for the aft edge. We've zipped the extension panel to the Dodger and are now working with the aft edge to pattern it against the Bimini.
Okay, so here is the mark that we put at our 13.5 that we took coming straight back, and it falls right in the center of these teeth that are on the Bimini. Okay, and our center is falling right in the center of the two zips, and the two zips are 2 inches apart. So what we want to do here is make these 2 inches apart. So right on the center mark, put your 1 inch, and you can make a straight line across there where your 13.5 is, and you can mark 1 inch out here, 1 inch over here, and there we have our zipper ends marked. Since we have such dark canvas, the easiest way that I've found to do this is, again, we want to be right in the center of the teeth because we're going to do this edge hot knifed with a facing just like we did the front edge, and run a binding on it. So we're going to go ahead and fold this 2 inch here and just like do a nail crease across it. Okay, then from that point, I want to bring that over, and you can just put your nail crease across, falling in the center zip. You want to make sure you're pulling it nice and taut. And it's worth taking your time on to get it fit real well. And then just come back, make your nail crease. Okay. And always refer back here to the end of your zip. Coming across. Okay. Probably every 3-4 inches, I would say. And then double check to make sure. Same right here. Coming up to our flat felled seam, or semi-flat felled seam here. To the center. Pinch. Slide the nail, and you can see we're getting a nice crease across there, and that'll be our hot knife line, and we'll go ahead and mark that with our soap pencil. That way we'll be able to see it well when we get to the table and be able to hot knife it. Okay, so again, refer back to your center with your little end, holding that at your zip. Come across the double seam, and then at this point, make a mark on your zipper. That way, it's easier to refer back to this point. You don't have to keep going to your zipper. And we're following just fine here. Okay? Then we're going to go down the curve to the end of the zip, and you can see on the zipper I've marked it where we're going to be cutting it off. And you always want to glance up here too and make sure you're getting it nice and tight. And pull back at the zipper as you're doing it. Yeah, looks good there. All we need to do now is mark the end where the zipper's going to come out at. I'll go ahead and get me some lines on my crease here. All right, so now come here, hold that. You can also use pins here too if you want to. And you can kind of see where the zippers stops there. I'm just gonna go ahead and make a knot right at the end there. And Well, lo and behold, that's where my notch on the zipper is also. Okay, now we're ready to do the starboard side. And again, we want to notch up our 2 inches here, match those up with your zipper, and then start again. And you definitely want to pattern both sides because no boat is a mirror image from one side to the other. Okay, and on the zipper here, we made the mark for the seam here, and also on this zipper over here for the seam. So we want to transfer that mark down straight across to the zipper that we're going to be taking off to sew to this spot, and that way we know that will fall where it's supposed to. Our 2 zippers will fall at our 2-inch marks. And then the same here, bring that mark straight across so that we have it falling on the zip. And then we're ready to take our zippers off, and we'll also cut the end of the zippers, the length off of those at the table too, where it comes off the end. So we want to go ahead and transfer our line onto the cover, so when we put the binding across, we know where the zipper needs to start. And again, if you want to connect these dots, you can, or you can just cut it. So we're going to go ahead and start cutting. And we want to bring this all the way out again so that we have plenty of room when we do the top of the door.
After we're done with this edge that zips onto the Bimini, we'll take it back and do the patterning for the side door curtain. Deb's transferring that line on the end here so that she doesn't lose it since she's chopping off the excess material. If after you're done you notice anything that looks a little bit out of place, like here we see a little bit of a bulge, you may want to consider chopping it off and making it more of a consistent curve or straight line. The reinforcing of the aft edge is done exactly the same way as we did the reinforcing for the forward edge.
All the notches are, all the seams are, so we can line it up.
As Deb stated, be sure to transfer all the center lines and the seam lines and the zippers to the reinforcing edge so that you can line it up. And then we're going to make it 2.5 inches just like we did previously. We are not going to show this whole process. It's self-explanatory because you've seen it already.
Notches up, notch that one up.
We're going to show this in double time. Everything is done exactly as it was before. So we're going to go through this quickly. Now all we need to do is install the binding and then the zipper. We're going to use a 1-inch swing away binder again. We're going to use a 1-inch bias binding from Sailrite. Deb's going to start at a couple inches away from the end. That would not be my choice, but that's how she does it, so that she can ensure that she has plenty of room to install the binding and the zippers to the ends.
Zipper.
Here we are at the opposite end, and Deb actually sews past her mark. I'd probably do that in every situation, but that was a mistake. She didn't intend to do that. These are the zippers that came off the Bimini, at least a half the zipper, and we're going to make an end stop as we did previously in this video. We're going to show this double time because you've already done this process. So we're speeding through it quickly. Whoops, the marks seem to have disappeared on our extension panel. So she's going to use the scrap piece to remark the extension panel with a soapstone pencil.
Always save this piece so you can come back to it. zipper marks are there.
Now we'll take the other half of the zipper that we removed from the Bimini and we'll install it directly across from those marks we just transferred over. We're going to pin it in place again. You could use a staple gun or you could use the double-sided tape. However, it does have to stay in place. Since this zipper is so long, pinning it in place will keep it from shrinking or stretching as we sew it on.
We have our marks here for this seam and the mark for the end of the zip there.
Deb's just being sure that the zipper is landing on the correct marks on that zipper extension panel. Once the zipper is secured in place, we'll take it over and sew it. We aren't going to start right at the beginning. We'll actually start an inch or two away from the end of the zipper. That way we can finish the sides off later and we can move the zipper if we need to. And we're sewing right next to the binding with the roping zipper foot left in place and with the needle bar positioning lever all the way to the right, so the needle is as close to the right as possible. When we get to the pins, remove the pins and continue to sew, just as we did previously. Now that our extension zippers have been installed to the forward edge and the aft edge, we'll zip it back onto the Dodger, as Deb is doing, and we'll also zip it back onto the Bimini, as Deb is also doing. Once the extension's in place, then we can do the patterning for the ends of the extension wings where they will attach to the side door curtain. So Deb's going to explain that now.
Okay, so here we are. This is our way it looks on the outside with our binding and our zippers. Fitting nice and snug. Okay, so under here is where I'm going to come back to the zipper, and the start of my zipper is right here, the tooth where my slide will start. So with this zipper pulled tight coming back, this flange will come out later, but we're just getting it out of the way for right now, or the hang down tail. So I'm going to pull that taut there, okay, and this binding will be on. So we want to start our slide, it looks like about 3/4 of an inch back from this edge. So I'm going to put an arrow, and we want our start three-quarters of an inch. We've got that where we want it. We're going to go ahead and mark with this pulled tight here along the zip where we want that to go. Okay, because this is a straight line here, what we're going to do is we're just going to pull this nice and tight and bring it to the edge of those teeth. I'm going to go ahead and make a crease here and bring it down, holding this up my lines, and I think we're right where we want to be there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that edge like we did inside, and when we get to the table, all we have to do is just hit a straight line coming from here to there. And since we have a short zip here, just a 24-inch zipper, we know where we're going to start it, and then it'll just end wherever it ends. Okay, and our binding will continue up to this point. And what we have at this edge looks like a real good point to me. So what we're going to do is just call that our point there, And then we can do the same thing with that. We can bring this line and we can angle it right down to that point because it'll be just above then the grab rail.
Now the other side's not the same, so Deb's going to explain a little bit about that.
Okay, now as I told you before, one side from the other is not going to be a mirror image. So when we get our cover on here, we could go ahead and you can run the straight line up to where the zip ends. And this one here is going to run off about 3/4 of an inch, the same as what the other side did. So your slide again is going to have to hang off this end 3/4 of an inch, which will be hid under the flange, so you won't see it. Okay, so now we're straight to here, we're straight to here, and we see that there's a little bit of looseness here. So what I like to do is take a pinch, just like I did on this zip. On the inside, pull the pinch to the zipper. On this side, down here, so then as you see, it pulls a lot of that right out when you come down to the zipper. So when we get zipped to the side panel, you're not going to have the looseness here on the side. So you want to do your pinch pull to the zipper here at the side in the center part. So we won't have quite so much of a straight line on this side. And that's just all of these different curves headed in different directions. That's just the way that it falls. Doesn't make any sense, but it sure looks nice when it's finished. So we're just going to bring that. And then we're just going to use the point that we already have. Go right down to that. Just like that. There.
Take note that we're cutting on a piece of glass to prevent damage to the tabletop when we use the hot knife. Also, take note, when we try to cut through the thread, which is a Helios thread, it doesn't cut very easily, even with a hot knife. That's the beauty of Helios and Tanara thread. They are lifetime guaranteed threads. They don't rot in the sun, and you can see the evidence of that every time we use the hot knife, as the hot knife seldom cuts the threads. It will if you keep it on top, as Deb is doing here, but it takes a couple seconds to do so. We'll also reinforce the ends with our own facing.
We also need to make a facing for this end. And what I'm going to do here is we're going to just go inside here and mark about a 1/2 inch over from this edge here, because we don't want to bring it all the way and get in the way of this zipper. So we just make a mark up into here. That way we can come right up this seam and back stitch on this to hold the facings ends down. Okay, and come right straight across here, just like we did on the others, only we had a lot of curve on that. And again, just about a 1/2 inch here. Go up underneath it about a 1/2 inch. Okay, so there we have our edge. I'll go up 2 inches, or 2.5 inches again, just like we did on our sides.
We'll use the Sailrite edge hot knife and cut out the facing on all sides. That seals the edge. We're going to use the 3/8 inch basting tape for canvas, and we're going to apply the facing to the bottom side of the extension panel. We'll then take it over to the Ultrafeed LSZ sewing machine, and we'll sew a straight stitch along that inner edge of the facing to hold it in place, reversing at the beginning and the end to lock it in place.
Okay, so we have this end of the zip tucked back already. So there's plenty of room to run our binding past that, okay? Now this one here is coming out almost to the end. So as you see, we're going to have a little bit of trouble running into that. So we are going to make sure that we stitch this down, but only to the point to where we can still get our binding on the edge. and this end is not going to need to be tacked down at all. Through the center here.
As I discussed earlier, I probably would have
here.
sewn the binding all the way to the ends and also the zippers. And then if I needed to rip up stitches, I'd rather rip up stitches than have to come back and re-sew the ends that I didn't sew down. That's just my opinion.
Just want to tack that down. Okay, if you already have your zipper here, you'll be back stitching into the zipper just to tack that down. So.
Now she's going to have to do the same thing to the opposite end. So she has to do this in 4 places. That's why I would sew it all the way to the ends. And if I had to, I'd rip up stitches to finish the edge.
And just like this one, we don't want that to be stitched down, but we do need to stitch the zipper down.
I think you get the idea. Finish off the ends if you have not stitched them down already. If you have stitched them down, and if you need to rip up stitches to sew on the binding or secure the next zippers on the ends, you can do that in lieu of this.
The end of that zip is caught.
It's always important to transfer your marks. Here Deb's having to get her scrap piece that she cut off so she can transfer the marks over to the panel that we need to sew. So she's moving those marks where the zipper would start.
3/4. Hang off the slide.
We're going to use the 1-inch swing away binder with a 1-inch bias binding, and we're going to sew that along the edge, reversing at the beginning and the end. Also, when we get to the end where the zipper will go 3/4 of an inch over for our extension panel, we're going to sew the binding a little bit longer so that we can use that to secure the zipper.
Where the end of the zipper's at. And you remember this is 3/4 of an inch that hangs off, so we're going to run our binding just a little bit long.
Deb's going to reverse right here at the corner. She's going to run long and reverse a little bit at the end as well. Now we're going to mark that 3/4 inch spot so we know where to start the zipper.
Our slide should go there.
We're using the soapstone pencil again.
Slide there.
This is the other half of the zipper that was removed from the door curtain panel, the upper portion of the door curtain that we had made earlier. The roping zipper foot left foot is installed on the Ultrafeed LSC sewing machine, and we move the needle bar all the way to the right to get as close to that zipper flange as possible. So we're sewing right next to the binding that we just installed. When you're done securing down the zipper in place, use the hot knife and seal the edges of the binding that were left raw. The extension panel is now complete. Now we'll zip it onto the Dodger. And now all we need to do is zip it onto the Bimini. There are 2 zippers for the Bimini. So once we get one started, then we just zip the other side. That's all there is to sewing the extension panel.